When we talk about the subject of origins, probably where the rubber meets the road is the biggest question of where mankind came from. Historically, when Neanderthal was discovered in the mid-1800s, it totally changed mankind's perceptions of where he may have come from. We have found fossils since then of potential ancestors to the human race. Where do we stand today in our understanding of where mankind came from? I've now got to hand over to our local hosts this subject. Again, thank you for coming to the series on origins.
And evolution, how did that, if I can use the word evolve, how did that start and how did that evolve? We looked at that Tuesday night. Well, tonight we're going to be looking at the origins of mankind. Now, as Stan Hudson had said, this is where the rubber meets the road. A lot of people don't have any issues with knowing that their cat may have evolved from a lower form of creature, but me? I don't know about that. They may have some issues with that idea. So we're getting right into this topic at the very beginning. This is a picture taken in 1875. 1875. And that man that's circled there, he is James Grant Lewis. He was born in 1841, and he was a bugler in the Civil War. He was a bugler in the Civil War. And they're from New York. This picture was taken in New York, so I assume he was with the Union. His oldest son is Charles Allen Lewis. He was 10 years old at the time this picture was taken. Charles Allen Lewis was born in 1865. In 1904, he gave birth to Charles Lewis, who in 1936 gave birth to, well, his wife did, had a son, James Benham Lewis, and in 1962, James Benham Lewis had a son named John Lewis. And that's me. That's me. So, using pictures, I can trace my genealogy back to at least 1875. I actually have a genogram put together, and I have a lineage that goes back to someone that came off the Mayflower. So, many within the scientific community today say we can trace our lineage back even further than that. If we go back far enough, you see the resemblance, okay, between my great-great-grandfather or between me, okay. So you say I can trace our lineage back to other primates, that baboons, orangutans, apes, monkeys, chimps, they are all our distant cousins. That's the idea among many within the scientific community. So we have a real discrepancy in the world today, where some believe that we are the product of special creation, but there are others who believe that we came up from a primordial soup, a bunch of chemicals and whatnot that was on the earth billions of years ago, that was hit by electricity and started life, and we eventually came from that. In 1965, Time Life Books included this fold-out insert, which became iconic in the world of evolution. What it shows is what is considered to be some of the earliest primates in history taking a walk to the right and eventually becoming modern man. Cro-Magnon man, Neanderthal man, Rhodesian man, etc. Now, in the write-up, it says, although the proto-apes and apes, so the earliest ones are proto-apes, before apes, were quadrupeds, that means they walked on all fours. This picture shows them here standing for the purpose of comparison. So there's a little caveat there to point out that yes, this picture is not entirely accurate because these animals walk on all fours, but we want to display them as standing so you can see you can see a better comparison. And in a footnote, it says that all of this is based on fragmentary fossil evidence. Fragmentary fossil evidence. This was 1965. This became iconic, as I mentioned. And you will see many pictures like this portraying what is believed to be the origins of the human race. We talked about a poll last Tuesday. I want to talk about a poll, two polls actually, that was done in the last 30 years or so. The Harris polls on human origins. Do you believe humans evolved from lower animals, or do you not believe that humans evolved from lower animals? And in 1994, it was pretty evenly split. 44% said, yes, we did evolve from lower forms, and 46% no, we did not. And the numbers are very much very interesting in contrast between how many believe in evolution, either theistic or natural evolution, and how many believe that humans did not evolve. The numbers are very a big discrepancy between those two. Well, another 11 years later, the poll is taken again. You can see how the numbers have changed. More people are believing that no, we did not evolve from lower animals. That is not where my ancestry can be drawn from. And so the numbers have changed, interestingly enough. We introduced you to Charles Darwin in our last lecture. In 1859, he published The Origin of Species booklet. And as I mentioned, this is probably one of the most influential books in the world today. One of the most influential books. In fact, one pollster, one writer believes that it's the third most influential book in our society today, behind the Bible and behind the Quran. And so it's something that turned things around. But in The Origin of Species, Charles Darwin never addressed the idea of human evolution. And so many who read the book were wondering, is he saying that we have evolved from lower animals as well? He talks about the finches, he talks about the tortoise, he talks about this animal and that animal, but he did not talk about human evolution. What does Darwin believe about that? Well, he addressed this question in 1871 when he published his book, The Descent of Man, a good 12 years later. And here's a quote from the book, Descent of Man. The primates, he said, branched off into two great stems, the New World and Old World monkeys. And from the latter, that is from Old World monkeys, at a remote period, man, the wonder and glory of the universe proceeded. So he said, someplace in the old world. Do you remember the distinction that used to be made before America was discovered? All they knew was Asia, Europe, and Africa. But then the Americas were discovered, and that became known as the New World. But he says that monkeys in the old world eventually, at some point, evolved into mankind. One of the things that spurred Darwin's thinking on was a discovery that was made in 1856 at a cave in Germany. Primate bones, human-like bones, were found in this cave in 1856. It is in the Neander Valley, and in German, the word Tal means cave. And so these were considered to be cavemen. Who lives in caves? This must be a primitive man. And so when these bones were found, the first picture that came out showed this very hairy creature that almost looks like an ape, but almost looks like a man. Notice that the knees are bent. He's not walking fully erect at this point. And these bones, based on these bones, this artist gave this rendition. Well, not too long later, after more bones were found, they said, we better upgrade this and give them less hair, in a sense. And so new pictures came out for Neanderthal man that didn't show him as much hair. The knees are still bent. The back is not entirely straight still at this point. And so from the artist's conception, these are still not yet erect human beings. They are not erect human beings. Now, what was all this based on? This was the original set of bones that was found in that cave. And so assumptions were made based on these things. Well, years later, or as years go by, over 400 complete skeletons have been found of Neanderthal. And when you follow how the different artists' renditions come about of Neanderthal, you'll see it's very interesting. More and more recently, they become less and less ape-like. In fact, the modern artist rendition of Neanderthal man looks very human. Looks very human to us. This is one of the latest artist renditions of Neanderthal man. There's an interesting quote from the magazine Science Digest about anthropologist art. And he says, the vast majority of artists' conceptions are based more on imagination than on what? Than on evidence. Artists must create something between an ape and a human being. The older the specimen is said to be, the more ape-like they make it. So the pictures, purported pictures of what they imagine Neanderthal man to be really portrays more the mind of the artist than what truly is. Remember last Tuesday, on Tuesday we talked about hard science and we talked about historical science. Hard science is that which you can measure, that which you can demonstrate, that which you can repeat. Historical science is you look at evidence, you look at the things that the fragments, the fragmentary evidence before you, and you draw some conclusions from that. This is the historical science. Well, this is what we know about Neanderthals. Based on the fossils that we've seen, based on the specimens that we have, Neanderthals buried their dead. Neanderthals played musical instruments. Isn't that interesting? I don't know of any ape that can do that. Neanderthals cooked over fire, and they painted scenes on cave walls as well. And you know what's interesting? Neanderthals had larger skulls and apparently had larger brains than we do as well. Now, I'm talking about Neanderthals as something in the past, but I want to bring some interesting things out. First of all, here's a comparison between the skull of a Homo sapiens, which we are classified as, and the skull of a Neanderthal. So notice again that the skull is a bit larger. Some of the distinctions between them, you'll see that the skull on the left is the Homo sapiens, the skull on the right is the Neanderthal. The one on the left has more pronounced cheekbones. The one on the right has more of a sloping head, and you have the burrowed ridges as well, eyebrow ridges as well. Now, when you come to paleoanthropologists, and that's people who study fossils of hominids or human-like or ape-like bones, you can classify them into two different groups. One are called the splitters. The splitters say any slight difference in a bone, in a fossil, we have to classify that as a new species. We have to classify that as a new species. And so, if we buried a bunch of different type of dogs in a field, and hundreds of years later, a splitter comes along and digs them up, they'll say these are all different species. One of them has a snout nose, one of them has an elongated nose, and they come in different sizes and different shapes. Some of them have squatty legs, some of them have longer legs. So these are different species. But then there's also the lumpers. The lumpers say within a species you have, or within a genus, you have a great deal of variety. A great deal of variety. So when they come upon that patch of dog bones, they'll say, yeah, there's a lot of differences between these dogs, but they're all dogs. They're all dogs. So you got the splitters and the lumpers. So what do we say about Neanderthal? Let me introduce you to a boxer from Russia, 7 foot 2 inches tall, Nikolai Valuev. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Valuev. He was a professional boxer from Russia. He was elected to parliament in Russian parliament in 2011. And notice his head. He's got that sloping head that the Neanderthal has. He has those pronounced burrow ridges on his eyebrows. He's got that as well. This man has a head, a skull, that looks like a Neanderthal. And he's not the only one. There are many people in the world today that have a head like that. Now, if you ever go to Russia and you ever meet Nikolai, I encourage you, do not tell him that you look like a primitive Neanderthal. He's 7 foot tall, he's 2 inches, and he boxes. He knows how to box. The point I'm making here is that the differences you see in these skulls does not necessarily indicate that these are two different species. That Neanderthals were just as human, just as much human as Nikolai is to us. Nikolai is to us. I want to share an account from the 1920s, the account of Nebraska man. A tooth was found in a farm. The farmer brought it to an anthropologist. The man saw the tooth. It was discovered in 1917, and he saw the tooth in 1922, and he said, "This is an ancient primate." And he shared this with the news, and mass media burst out, and suddenly you had an artist putting together the Nebraska man, the earliest man tracked by a tooth, an astounding discovery of human remains in the Pliocene strata. We found the missing link was the mass height. Well, about 5 years later, they toned it down, and they said, no, this is actually a pig tooth. We thought it was a human tooth, but it was a pig tooth. Now, to everybody's credit, they recanted on the idea that this was a primitive man. But the point I want to make here is that you cannot base your ideas of human origins on media, the media today. Because this is what you'll get. Based on a tooth, you'll get pictures like this, based on a tooth. The media and the textbooks will still tell you things, will still teach things as if there's no questions about it. Man definitely descended from lower forms of animals. But when you talk to the experts, you'll find that there is quite a bit of contention among them. Neanderthal was very much human. Now in Tanzania, in the 70s, I believe it was, a skull was found, Zinjanthropus. This was found by, I think, the Leakey family. And the question came out, is this an ape, or is this a human being? Is this someone who, an ancient ape, or was it an ancient human being? So questions came out as a result of that. The reason many believe that this was a precursor to man is because it was found close to some tools, some ancient tools. And so the belief is that this ape-looking creature was using those tools. That was the belief at that point. John Reeder, who is an evolutionist and a paleoanthropologist in his book Missing Links in 2011, said when Louis Leakey squeezed, notice that word squeeze, Zinjanthropus bosei into his scheme of human evolution. Let me stop there for a moment. Notice the Leakeys, Louis and his wife Mary Leakey, they were evolutionists. They believed that human beings came about through evolution from lower forms of animals. And so when they find a specimen such as this, they are going to have the tendency to read into it. And I like the way John Reeder put it. They squeeze Zinjanthropus into their scheme of human evolution. He subjected both the interpretation of the evidence and his own preconceptions to some distortion. He claimed the specimen resembled modern humans more closely than it resembled apes, which even the most casual observer might have disputed. So even among evolutionists, even among evolutionary paleoanthropologists, there's a great deal of contention regarding how to interpret the bones of primates that are found. Donald Johanson is probably one of the most famous paleoanthropologists, and he is noted for his discovery of what they call Lucy in 1974. The creature was dated at 3.2 million years. Now, the fragments that he found, you can see to the far left, that is all that was found of Lucy. But a lot of interpretation was made, and one artist rendered it looking kind of ape, but it was totally erect. And notice that there are no foot bones found of Lucy, yet nonetheless the artist, the person who put that together, gave it human footprints. They made it erect, and they made it look very human as well. So I want to read this however, as more time progressed and as more bones were found, in 1975 from the magazine Nature, C. Oxford said the following: Lucy had curved toes and fingers. So while the artist gave you human-looking toes, human-looking feet, no extra bones found showed you curved toes instead. It had a locking wrist, which is used for knuckle walking. It had a big toe that pointed outward and long arms. There's no vocal cords or an inner ear structure like humans have for balance walking, all consistent with a what? A tree-dwelling ape. A tree-dwelling ape. Now, there are some monkeys who walk on branches, who walk on limbs, and they walk erect. And so their bones, and where the leg joins with the hip bone, the pelvis bone, will look like an erect, or will be an erect creature. So some monkeys do have that. And that's one of the big distinguishing marks that are made, but we got to be careful not to assume that if it walks erect, that it is human. Also, near the place where Lucy was found in Tanzania, some footprints were found that looked very human, and I will say they are human. But notice this quote here is dated at 3,700,000 years ago, which was pretty consistent or pretty close to the time of Lucy. And one person said, if these footprints were not known to be so old, we would readily conclude that they were made by a member of our genus, that is, that they were Homo, that there's some human type. So notice the thinking here. Since it is 3.7 million years old, they cannot be human. If it wasn't that old, I would conclude that they were human. This is another case where I remember I quoted from Richard Dawkins on Tuesday. He said the study of biology, you're looking at things that appear to be designed for a purpose. But he's not going by what the appearance tells him. He's going by his evolutionary preconception. They're not designed, and they're not for a purpose, because there is no designer, and there is no God. Well, here, the author of this article in Natural History is kind of using the same logic. Since man evolved from lower forms of animals, and humans were not around 3.7 million years ago, these footprints cannot be human. You understand the logic here? Now that's according to potassium-argon dating. In a future lecture, we're going to be getting into the dating systems that are used. We're going to be getting more into that. So, what was the pushback on Lucy when more bones were found? Johannes, the man who found Lucy, argued that the female of the species apparently lived in the trees, and the male lived on the ground. That's the conclusion he came to. He could call it sexual dimorphism. That is, the female had different morphology, different anatomy than the male did. In order to hold on to this idea that Lucy is a precursor to mankind, he had to extend his argument that much. Now, many believe today that the bones of Lucy are actually a combination of ape and human-like species. Let me tell you, Johansen found this in a bedrock. He found it in a pit where you had bones of apes, bones of humans, bones of pigs, and bones of others as well. It would be like having 15 or 16 jigsaw puzzle pieces all mixed together, and you do not have the original picture to go by. So you've got to figure it out yourself. So it's very subjective. And what Johansen did, he said, I believe that these bones belong together because I am convinced that man evolved from a common ancestor with ape. So you see that hard science is supposed to be objective, but historical science is very much subject to interpretation. Everybody can look at the same data, but come to a different conclusion. All right, then there's Artie. His actual name is Ardipithecus ramidus. And when you see Ardipithecus, that means it is in the ape tree. It is in the Australopithecines are southern apes. And this predates Lucy according to their dating system, 4.4 million years ago. This skeleton was found in Africa as well. And some of the features of this skeleton were more promising even than that of Lucy. However, as you can see, the feet again have that extended and curved toe, separate from the rest of them. Our toes and our thumb toe and our other toes all line up, which is needed for erect walking. But apes, they have the toes set that way so they can cling to branches and the like. And his arms were very long as well. Here again is the artist's rendition. Doesn't look like a modern ape, doesn't look like a modern human being. Looks like maybe something in between. Looks like something in between. And so, even though it was promising, it did not prove to be what was wanted. Notice this quote regarding Artie. It says, "This is a fascinating skeleton." And again, this is from an evolutionist, William Jungers. This is fascinating skeleton, but based on what they present, the evidence for bipedality, that is, the evidence that this thing walked on 2 feet, the evidence for bipedality is limited at best. Divergent big toes, that's where the toe is separate from the thumb toe is separate from the other toes, are associated with grasping, and this has one of the most divergent big toes you can imagine. Why would an animal fully adapted to support its weight on its forelimbs in the trees elect to walk on 2 feet on the ground? This is an evolutionist bringing out this question. A couple of other comments on paleoanthropologists. Lord Solly Zuckerman is a zoologist, and he says, "We then move right off the register of objective truth into those fields of presumed biological science, like extrasensory perception or the interpretation of man's fossil history, where to be to the faithful, anything is possible. And where the ardent believer is sometimes able to believe several contradictory things at once." What is he saying here? He's saying that because the evidence is so scanty, and because our imaginations can grasp so many things, we can make almost any interpretation we want on the fossils that we find. That's what's being brought out here. You may remember a quote from last Tuesday from Richard Lewontin. He's the man that says that we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. All right, this man is an evolutionist. Notice what he says here. All the fossils which have been dug up and are claimed to be ancestors, we haven't the faintest idea whether they are ancestors. All you've got is Homo sapiens there. You've got that fossil there. You've got another fossil there. It's up to you to draw the lines, because there are no lines. There are no lines. This is a pronounced scientist who is sharing this. But still, people are drawing lines. Here is an example of one person's view of how humanity came about. He believes that humanity came about from different predecessors. For example, you have Australopithecus promethus to Florisnan man, to Rhodesian man, to the Negro race. And you have over here Neanderthal man, to Cro-Magnon man, to the Caucasian race. This is one person's conception of how the human race came about. And he believes that the different, quote, races in humanity came about from different primitive ancestors. This is important to note, and I'm going to talk more about this in a little while. I like this quote here. This is back in 1982. The main problem in reconstructing the origins of a man is a lack of fossil evidence. All there is could be displayed on a dinner table. All right? That's a little over 40 years ago. I can say that we may need about 5 dinner tables or so now for all the bones, but it's still very, very scanty evidence. Here's another evolutionist that has a very interesting quote here. Dr. David Pilbeam says the following: "Perhaps generations of students of human evolution, including myself, have been flailing about in the dark, that our database is too sparse, too slippery for it to mold our theories. Rather, the theories are more statements about who? About us and ideology than about the past. Notice again, we talked about this on Tuesday, there's a difference between data and interpretation. What Dr. David is saying here is that interpretation is playing more of a role in this field than data. Paleoanthropology reveals more about how humans view themselves than it does about humans came about. But he adds a little caveat, that's heresy. I'm not supposed to be saying that in the scientific community. I'm not supposed to be saying that. Another quote I want to share with you, Dr. Bernard Wood. Even with all the fossil evidence, and this is only fossil evidence and analytical techniques from the past 50 years, a convincing hypothesis for the origin of Homo remains elusive. Remains elusive. These are not creationists talking. These are evolutionists talking. Many of these are paleoanthropologists, those who believe in the ape to man story. Those who believe that human beings descended from lower forms of animals. So there's a lot of contention within that community. The media will tell you it's lock solid, everybody believes it. Man came from a common ancestor with ape. Textbooks will tell you man came from ape, but within the community itself, there is a lot of contention, a lot of uncertainty. So, where did all these come from? We talked about Artie, we talked about Lucy, we talked about Neanderthal. There's a few others as well, Homo erectus, Homo naledi, etc. We're not going to get into all of those, but where did they fall into? Basically, there are two categories, only two categories that we know right now, and that is the Homo, or Homo sapiens, and the Australopithecines, or the apes. And those fossils which are lock solid, we know are one or the other, fall into one of these categories. And then there's the muddle in the middle. And usually those come from fossils which apparently, and some argue, have pieces of human remains and pieces of ape remains. So, Neanderthal, as we mentioned, that falls under Homo sapiens. If you're not sure about that, go to Russia and look up Nikolai Valuev and talk to him about that. He's got the Neanderthal skull. They are Homo sapiens. As far as Artie, as we pointed out already, that's clearly an ape creature. Denisovans, those are humans. Habilis, that is a mixture, a bone mixture of human and ape bones. Setibus, same thing. Lucy is an ape. Homo erectus is a Homo sapiens, a human being. Naledi is a human being. And some of these were found with differences because of pathological reasons. That is, there appears to be some type of disease that took over the community. In fact, some felt that when we came across some, I can't remember if it was Naledi or not, they're found on an island. And one thing that we have discovered, when people or when animals face starvation, the body makes some changes in the offspring so that the offspring are not going to grow as large. They're going to require less nutrients. The brain gets smaller as well. Have you ever seen a picture of a small hippo? Those are hippos that are on a remote island. They don't get their ancestors, their parents didn't have a whole lot of access to food. And so the genes are programmed to make the children smaller when there is a lack of food. And I believe that's where that was the case with Naledi, or it may have been Hobbit. I can't remember exactly. I read this book called Contested Bones recently. I'll show you a QR code where you can find it in a link tree. Contested Bones is a great book. It goes through all of these standout bones that were found. Ian Tattersall, an evolutionist, as quoted from this book, said the following: even allowing for the poor record we have of our close extinct kin, Homo sapiens appears as distinctive and unprecedented. There is certainly no evidence to the notion that we gradually became who we inherently are over an extended period of time. Again, this is an evolutionist as quoted from this book, Contested Bones. Great book. Great book. So, what impact has the ape to man story had on the human race, had on our society, had on our civilization? I want to throw a caveat in here. I want to point out that the ramifications of a theory upon human mindset and whatnot is not proof of one way or the other, whether it be true or false. I want to make that clear. But what I want to point out is the deep and dangerous ramifications of this ape to human story. I want to share that. First of all, and we're going to learn more about this in the short video that we're going to see shortly, is the Scopes trial. This is the 100-year anniversary of the Scopes trial. This happened in Tennessee. What happened here? At this time, the state passed a law that said you cannot teach evolution in our public schools. And the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which was recently created at that point, wanted to fight against that and said, no, we need to have freedom to teach evolution here. And so what they did is they arranged with someone, a substitute teacher, to teach evolution in the public schools at Dayton, Tennessee. And he did that, and he was arrested, and there was a trial for that. So in this trial, you had Clarence Darrow, who was I can't remember who was the prosecutor and who was the defendant. I can't remember now. I always get confused between the two. Clarence Darrow was the defense lawyer. So John Scopes was put on trial for teaching evolution in the school. And Darrow was his defense lawyer. William Jennings Bryan was a preacher. He wasn't a lawyer, but he acted as the prosecutor. And now there wasn't a whole lot at stake here, it seemed, but there was a whole lot of publicity on this trial. Day by day, the radio was relatively new at that time. Day by day, you would hear on the news about what the prosecution did, what the defense did, what this witness said, what that witness said. Well, at some point in the trial, Darrow called William Jennings Bryan to the stand. The prosecutor, the defense attorney, called the prosecuting attorney to go to the stand. Now, William Jennings Bryan wasn't ready for this, but he went nonetheless. And Darrow began asking him some very difficult questions that he was not ready for. For example, who was Cain's wife? In the Bible, we read that Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel, and after Cain killed Abel, he took his wife and went to another valley. Well, who is his wife? Well, the man had no answer. Was Jonah really swallowed by a whale? The man had no answer. And so he looked pretty bad. It was made national papers and whatnot. This Bible-believing man came out with bad PR after this. Now, I want to take a look, and this was a turning point for a debate, the debate between creation and evolution. Because as you know today, it's creationism that's not allowed in our public schools, and it's evolution that's allowed. Now, Scopes used a book from George William Hunter, called A Civic Biology. And in the chapter on evolution, I want you to notice this quote. He says the following: "At the present time, there exist upon the earth 5 races or varieties of man." And he goes through the different races, and finally the highest type of all, the who? The Caucasians, represented by the civilized white inhabitants of Europe and America. This was in a textbook used in the 1920s in our public schools. What was being taught here by George William Hunter is that the races or the different ethnicities that you see in the human race today can be ranked. And you know what? Darwin said the very same thing. Notice again the title of his book, Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, and notice what the subtitle is, or the what? Preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. That gives you a little hint of how he views those different races. And in his book, Descent of Man, he comes right out and says it. At some future period, the civilized races, and that's the British way of spelling civilized, okay? At some future period, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. The break between man and his nearest allies will then be wider, instead of as now between the Negro and the gorilla. Notice what this man is saying. He is saying the Caucasian. Now, at that time when Darwin wrote this, what was that phrase? The sun never sets on the British Empire. You've heard that phrase? So the Brits were considered to be running the world. And so they felt that they were the superior race. They were the superior race. Now, Darwin himself was not pro-slavery, but he clearly had a view regarding the African race. Not only was there racism there in his writings in the book Descent of Man, but sexism as well. From pages 873 and 874, the chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man's attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than can woman. Whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of senses and hands, man has ultimately become superior to woman. This is Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin was allowed to live as long as he did because his wife was a good Christian woman. And she dealt with these things. She put up with these things. In fact, it is believed that he held off publishing his book, Origin of Species, so as not to offend his Christian wife. But here he says that evolution has made the male superior to the woman. Thomas Huxley was considered Charles Darwin's bulldog. Charles Darwin, although he said things that were clearly racist and sexist, he was much more genteel than what Huxley was. Notice what Huxley says in his essay, Emancipation, Black and White. This was written in response to Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. He said, it may be quite true that some Negroes are better than some white men, but no rational man, cognizant of the facts, believes that the average Negro is the equal, still less the superior, of the white man. Where does all this come from? Why does he have this idea? Because of the idea that the different ethnicities that we see in the human race today evolved from lower forms. And the belief is that the Caucasian has advanced quicker than the other ethnicities. Stephen Jay Gould is an evolutionist. I think he died in the early 2000s. And he shared the following from one of his books. He said, biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, but they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. The litany is familiar. Cold, dispassionate, objective, modern science shows us that races can be ranked on a scale of superiority. Ouch! So what impact has the evolutionary theory had on the human race? I think one of the things we see clearly is that of racism. But that's not all. I want to take a look at Sir Francis Galton. Sir Francis Galton basically was the proponent of what's called eugenics. He pioneered the field of the study of eugenics. It's a term that he called good genes. Eugenics means good genes. We're learning about genes, and he said, you know what? We want to advance the human race. And so we want to, it would be good for the human race not to allow those who are less advanced to continue having offspring. And so in the Americas, in the mid-1900s, in parts of Europe, eugenics was being carried out. Forced sterilization was being carried out. And all of this was based on the idea of evolution. There's someone else who felt that we should do the same thing as well. His name is Adolf Hitler. And he was a strong proponent of eugenics and of racism as well. So, what impact has the ape to man story had on the human race? I think we can see it's been extremely negative, extremely dark. More and more, as more and more the evolutionary story has taken hold of our society, I don't think it's an accident that we see emotional instability, depression, mental illnesses, and the like on the rise as well. If you believe that you have no purpose in life, if you believe that you have no future after you die, if you believe that you are just another freak of nature, that's going to have an impact on your mindset. That's going to have an impact on your self-assessment, and that's going to have an impact on how you see others as well, as we can see. I want to share a brief video with you, and it's going to get quite a bit more into that Scopes monkey trial.
Today we are in Dayton, Tennessee, in a courthouse where a very famous trial took place nearly 100 years ago. And it all had to do with the great question of where did humankind come from? We had evolution presented, we had special creation presented. And those opposing opinions were clearly the focus for that trial. In America, we're still talking about that today. Where did man come from?
The Scopes monkey trial is an interesting event in American history. Probably has been distorted a great deal, especially in things like the movie Inherit the Wind. But what I think happened there was the evolutionary side was presented publicly and not scandalously, which it might have been considered previously. But it was given an airing. It is said that ideas start out first as a heresy, and then with acceptance, and then finally everybody knew it all the time. The stages and acceptance of a theory. But in order to reach that, it first has to be aired out. And I think the Scopes trial probably gave the evolutionary viewpoint the publicity that eventually resulted in its acceptance.
The long-term effects of the Scopes trial are big, much bigger than you might expect for a trial that a lot of people have never even heard of. The initial change is really not much. There's sort of a drawback away from the anti-evolution crusade of the 20s. So when the ACLU took the case of Scopes to the Tennessee Supreme Court overruled it on a technicality because of the judge setting the fine instead of the jury, which was supposed to happen. And so the Tennessee Supreme Court made it clear, we don't want to see any more of these cases. And so that was the end of that. And the culture of sort of conservative Protestant Christianity, they turned more towards liquor and the prohibition crusades of the 20s. And so it was largely, in some sense, forgotten. At the same time, the textbook publishers decided that evolution was a hot-button issue that they really didn't want to mess with. They did not want to risk some sort of big campaign that got their textbooks dropped because they made a lot of money selling textbooks. So they decided the best thing to do was to simply, as much as they could, excise references to evolution from their textbooks. In the meantime, over in the world of science, you have the birth of what is now known as the neo-Darwinian synthesis. So The difficulty with Darwin's origin was that he really didn't understand how inheritance worked. And no one did. And it wasn't really until the turn of the 20th century that people began to rediscover and uncover the principles of genetics that govern how traits are passed along. And it took another 30 years before statisticians came along and started working out what that would mean in populations over time and how natural selection could actually work in those circumstances. And that birthed what we call the neo-Darwinian synthesis, which then took time to work its way through the scientific world. And then, once it was finally generally accepted by the scientific world, then the scientists sort of looked around and said, we've all come to a conclusion about evolution, but it's not in the textbooks. The textbooks don't even mention evolution, which was crazy. So at the Darwin Centennial at the University of Chicago in 1959, the call came out that we need to change our textbooks. It just needs to happen. And so along comes the 1960s, and the textbooks do a complete 180. Instead of not mentioning evolution at all, they go to make evolution the unifying theme of biology, and including these, outrageous claims like Dobzhansky's "nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." So parents who grew up in the 40s and 50s and learned biology from textbooks that barely mention evolution now had kids coming home telling them that, well, nobody believes in creation anymore, and everybody thinks evolution is true, and it's just obvious. So there was a bit of a cultural crisis, you might say. At the same time, you have Henry Morris and James Whitcomb working on The Genesis Flood, which comes out in 1961 and becomes, in a very real sense, sort of the rallying point for the reaction to evolution. They provided an alternative way to understand the fossil record, to understand what fossils were, to understand comparative anatomy, and all the stuff that goes into evolution. It gets wrapped into Whitcomb and Morris's ideas in their book. So it's a recipe for confrontation, right? You have a public that is generally ignorant of evolution, didn't know anything about it. You have a scientific world who's decided this is evolution, this is how it works, and you need to learn it, so we're going to put it in the textbooks. And then you have the creationist, the Genesis Flood from Whitcomb and Morris, that becomes this rallying cry, rallying point. And so, of course, there's going to be conflict. So in the 70s, you have the beginnings of the trials. In the 80s, you have the Arkansas trial and the Louisiana trial, where creation is basically ruled out of the courtroom. And it's a really weird circumstance because in the Scopes trial, Darrow and the defense were arguing for equal access of creation and evolution so that the kids could make up their own mind, where Brian is trying to kick them out and keep only creation in the classroom. In the 80s, the trials were basically reversed. The evolutionists were working to kick out creation from the classrooms, and the creationists were arguing for equal time and equal treatment. Very bizarre history, but there it is. I mean, that's in a nutshell the long-term impact of what the Scopes trial brought to us.
Oh, the biblical view of origin is so exciting. It's so wonderful, and it's so logical and beautiful. God did it in 6 days, and it specifies what he did on each day. And at the end of many of what he did on each day, it says, and it was so. I love that. It was so. God knows that we kind of may doubt and wonder. And it reminds me of John 14, verse 2, where it says, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. So I think we can put right back down there in the Bible, every time it says, and it was so, we can add, parentheses, if it were not so, I would have told you. And think about this, when he made us in his image, what beauty and value that does to the human being. And we should treat one another, and we should act like the image of God.
When it comes to educating our young people on questions of origins, I do think it's important to present both views. They need to have a strong foundation in the Bible and creation science, but they also need to know at least the basics of what are being taught in the public sector from evolutionists. Because once they get outside of the church and they hear some outside opinions or data, and they have no way to compare that to what they've been taught, that can start to erode their faith, not only in what they've been taught, but everything, their foundation. So I think they need to be prepared for what they're going to encounter in the secular world. And there's some great books available, lots of great resources for how to teach both sides.
So the debate continues. It was not settled in this courtroom nearly 100 years ago. It's still going on today. But for more information, let's now take a look away from science and take a look at God's Word and see what good news we can find out about human origins there.
Man evolved from lower forms, and this is very divergent from what we find in the Bible. We are told in the very first chapter, God speaking says, "Let us make man how? In our image, according to our likeness." God refers to himself in the plural form, and so he is looking for man to have that same kind of plurality. There's a fellowship being implied here with God himself, and there's a fellowship to be part of the image of God. One thing we're reading Genesis 2:22 in the creation account, the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to man. While Darwin was teaching that the man is superior to the woman through the evolutionary process, the Bible tells us that God's intention was for the two of them to be partnered together, co-equal partners. He didn't make her from a piece of the skull to be his head. He didn't make him from a piece of his foot to be stamped on. He made her from the rib. They are to be side by side. They are to be equal. And so then, to mankind to be made in the image of God means that he created them for fellowship. We're to be with one another. We're to be with him. God is a God who loves the company of his creatures. He created them to reflect him. Being in his image means that we look like him. We impersonate him in a sense. We reveal him. And he created them to love. Now every creature, almost every creature, you'll find has some type of maternal or paternal love. But the love that I speak about here is a divine love. A love that is entirely selfless, a love that is shown to us at the cross. He wanted us to have that kind of love as well. So the Bible has a teaching against sexism, and it teaches against racism as well. The Bible tells us that there's only one race. We're told in Acts chapter 17, verse 26, and he made from how many? One man. Every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. According to the Bible, every one of us here are distant cousins. Every one of us. No matter what nation you're from, no matter what color skin you are, we are distant cousins. And we all descended from one man and one woman. All descended from one man and one woman. God wants to be our Father. According to the Bible. Galatians 4, verse 6, because you are sons and daughters, God has sent forth his Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. If we evolve from lower forms of creatures, those are our fathers. But the Bible gives us a higher privilege. The Bible gives us a higher calling to be his children and to look to him as our Father. And so when we talk about the Bible's perspective of human origins, we determine that we're not from pond scum. We're not mutants in any way. According to the Bible, we have a God-given origin. According to the Bible, we have a God-given purpose. According to the Bible, we have a God-offered future as well. We can have a father-child relationship with him. This scenario is much more appealing. That doesn't prove it, but I want to share with you, when you believe this, rather than the theory of evolution, the ape to man story, you're going to have much more meaning in your life. Your life will be so much more fulfilling, and you will discover so much more peace as a result of that. And that's my hope for each of us. Well, at this point, we're going to have the drawing. So do I have one of the greeters come up and bring the attendance cards here? Because I've got 2 flash drives. These have 7 video sessions on them. And again, I copied these of YouTube channels, a list of podcasts, and a list of websites that you might find interesting to help you in your search on creationism. Okay? Any questions for tonight? Any questions on tonight's topic? Any questions, Joe?
So, and I'd ask you to restate the argument that was placed.
Yeah.
You kind of placed racism at the feet of evolution,
Yes,
in some way, shape, or form, whether you to say it was partially responsible or fully responsible or somewhere in between.
yeah,
Since we judge each other based on height, weight,
yeah,
a million other things, it feels irresponsible
yeah.
to lay racism at the feet of something like evolution.
I appreciate that. And you remember what Stephen Jay Gould said? He said before 1850, racism was common. People were doing that already. Slavery existed before Darwin. So racism was going on already. But what he said evolution did is it extended it. It gave it more of an impetus. That's what Stephen Jay Gould said, and that's what I'm sharing as well. That it makes racism easier, in a sense, to embrace, to adopt.
Well, do you think there's more racism since evolution was coined?
Well, not knowing the entire history of man, I can't say that for sure. Slavery was outlawed at the time Darwin's ideas were being progressed, were being promoted. So someone can argue in that. But based on what Darwin said, based on what his Thomas Huxley, his bulldog, said, based on what Stephen Jay Gould said as well, who is an avid evolutionist, based on what those who were proponents of evolution were saying, when they embraced evolution, they naturally took the side that these other races were inferior to ours. And you saw the tree that was drawn there as well, how different purported primates, ancient primates, evolved into the different races of the human race. Mm-hmm. So that naturally brings out the question, well, which one of us then are more advanced? So the two are going to be interlocked in that sense. Yeah. Not everybody who's an evolutionist is a racist. I want to make that very clear. Not everybody who's a creationist is not a racist. Mm-hmm. I want to make that very clear.
Yeah, that is clear.
Yeah, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
I think depending on how you judge something, I mean, if you judge a fish based on how it climbs a tree, you figure it's stupid. And so if you look at IQ, you could say Asians technically have the highest IQ. If you look at sports, we're measured on, I would say, different scales.
Yeah.
And there are statistics out there.
The important thing is the Bible teaches us that every one of us are extremely valuable, eternally valuable. Evolution, you come to the conclusion with evolution is that you really don't have much meaning. You really don't have much meaning. And I think that's one of the critical factors. Again, that doesn't prove or disprove either one, but that is, we can expect that type of outgrowth, we can expect that type of outcrop from those ideas. Good question. Any other questions?
Is that belief we are going to evolve into something else?
Good question. You know, I remember as a teenager, I used to get this magazine called Omni magazine. I don't know if it's still in publication or whatnot. But I remember someone giving us a picture of what they were believing the human race will eventually become. And it was actually a ball-shaped creature with 2 small feet. And I think it just held the brain only, and it was up in a tree. I don't know where they got that idea, but yeah, what do do evolutionists envision people becoming? I can't speak for that. I don't know. We have here from St. John's. We have a professor of history and philosophy of science. If you ever want to pick someone's brain on creation, this is a man. I don't know if you have heard anything about that. Why don't you come up, you all chat. Come on up.
Actually, I think I actually think I remember that magazine.
Omni magazine?
Yeah.
I
just can't place it. But I remember the ball-shaped creature. And,
You do?
Yeah.
So I'm not losing my mind.
No.
I still have some memory.
Yeah, so I think, sorry, as that last question.
Yeah, the question was, what is the projection of evolutionists as to what the human race is going to become?
Mm-hmm.
Did I capture that question?
Yeah. Nowadays, I actually hear more discussion about how human beings can direct their evolution, as opposed to what will become. Because now the discussion is often that, well, we have so much technology that we can actually direct our evolutionary development, which of course begs the question, but I thought nature was going to do that, right? So, but now the discussion is that, well, we've sort of reached the pinnacle of evolution in the sense that we can now direct how it is that we evolve. Now, you might think that that's maybe changing the goalposts a little bit, right? Because if we're smart enough now that we could just make computer chips that make us smarter, or have bionic parts that make us run faster, or if we need to colonize a planet that has a higher gravity, well, we'll change our genes so that we're bulkier, more muscular, right? Of course, the question that still remains is that, but could we get there naturally? Or are there some sort of bounds around what we become? So are there any limits in that regard? But from what I've read, the discussion seems to be that the role of epigenetics, as well as kind of boundary conditions as to what human beings are able to become, they seem to be set by what's allowable in our genetic code. Since more of as the pastor mentioned, the idea of epigenetics, so that when people say a population forces or experiences hunger or famine, it's found that the next generation is often smaller. And this was discovered rather recently in looking at, say, the granddaughters of people who experienced a forced famine by the Nazis in, I think it was one of the Nordic countries, I think it was in the Netherlands. They found that only now were their grandchildren giving birth to children that were of normal height, right? And the thought seems to be because of the forced famine. And then they've been able to discover epigenetic factors where the genes turn on or off, various functions that code everything from the level of dopamine you have to your resistance to hunger, to your height, all of that in any population. And so it seems to be that physical effects or sociological effects can have imprints on our populations, right? So you deny a population food for a while, and then you shouldn't be surprised if in the next generation their cognitive powers aren't so great. But that's not because there's genetic inability. It's because there might be a condition, a social condition that makes it such that the body says, well, the next generation ought to be this. So the body seems to have the ability to turn on or off various genes. So we're not able to reach our full potential until everything is met.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, epigenetics is a very interesting topic. And please feel free to stay up here, Dr. Moore. Good. I can listen to this man for hours. But epigenetics, as was mentioned, are on and off switches for your genes. When a group of fish get stuck in a cave where there's absolutely no light, the next generation is born with no eyes and with pale skin. Why? Because we need to conserve that energy, and so changes are made in the offspring. All this information is front-loaded into the genes. All of it is front-loaded into the genes. And so that changes in the environment, changes, I like the social pressures as well. All these things have a factor on the children, on the offspring. I'm sorry, brother, you had a...
I was kind of piggybacking off of this question. By the way, I'm going to preface this by saying I believe in the biblical narrative. But in evolution, they talk about these modifications over time. Is there some kind of measurement of time that it would take for a modification to take in this larger scale of evolution? That beat that up.
Let me try to answer, and you all, if you want, please feel free as well. More and more studies are showing rapid diversification. The conventional science believes that it can take thousands, millions of years for changes to take place within a species. But we're discovering rapid diversification, probably based on epigenetics. That study is still going on. And so that one set of finches migrates over to another island, their children are going to have different shaped beaks based on what their needs are on that island. So a lot of rapid diversification going on.
My question was more about...
We're able to trace whether a given population, there's a maternal ancestor or the paternal ancestor. The maternal ancestor is through the mitochondria, because you only get that from your mother, and then the paternal to the Y chromosome. And it seems to be that every few thousand years, or even every few thousand years, there's a certain kind of average number of generations where every now and then there's a mutation in the Y chromosome. But that mutation in the Y chromosome is not a detrimental mutation, right? So it seems difficult to call it a mutation because it then gives rise to a new line, right? So then we can say, well, this population came from, these were like the male progenitors of that line, etc. And then we could just say the same thing for the maternal ancestors. But the point there seems to be that if there are these mutations that are not detrimental, that begin a new line, then are we really right to call them mutations at all, as opposed to kind of just sort of unfolding of varieties within the same species? So we can get a lot of variety within the same species, but still have it be the same species. It doesn't seem to branch off into another species. So the question is, as the pastor was saying, is that maybe we're underestimating all the information that was front-loaded into the genetic code itself, and its ability to respond to both internal and external pressures, and then to take on various varieties, right? All of them would be within the genetic code itself, but would respond to various pressures, like social pressures would themselves just be other environmental pressures. So I think that's the best way I can...
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it's just interesting the way that all works. They very often when they've domesticated a fox, within a couple of generations, it changes its appearance completely, and it looks like a domestic dog. So that's based on the environment. Based on the environment. Very interesting. This is clear evidence of design. Clear evidence of design. Any other questions? Good questions. Debbie.
It's not a question, it's a comment. When I went to Italy to visit my Italian family, they knew right away we were Americans. I am full Italian, but they could tell by my look that I was not...
Born in America.
Yeah, that I was born in... My mother was born in Italy,
yeah.
But they knew, like this, the Americanos are here. So, and a friend of mine was saying the same thing with Indonesians. A lot of them were Chinese descent, but you can then they change their appearance once they move to another country. So maybe that's a little bit.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. There are so many things that can change our appearances. It's kind of almost disturbing a little bit, right? So, for instance, if you get enough vitamin K2, your body is able to deposit, say, calcium and magnesium properly in a more symmetrical route, so you end up being better looking. So something as much as nutrition means that you can have more full bone structure. So things like nutrition can change all that. And also what you state here, it's something that people seem to have known even before the 1840s, right? So a man by the name of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. He was a German, he wrote in the late 1780s, early 1760s, and he's considered to be the father of human anthropology. And so around that time, he said, look, when we look at all the skulls, rationally, we just have to assume that there are many varieties but one species. Right? And he says, the only reason why you might think that maybe there are different species or something like that is that you're not looking at comparable skulls, right? So you have to look at say a 30-year-old skull from this ethnic group, and a 30-year-old skull from that ethnic group, and a 30-year-old skull from that ethnic group. And don't take the skull of supermodels and then compare it to the skull of the average person, because you might think that, like, oh, clearly these people are better. It's superior. So he says, once you take all the criteria and you base them, you see that all the ethnicities kind of run into one another. And so you can sort of tell, because it's just a matter of variety. It's like, you don't go from white to black, you go to white, and then a little bit tawny, and then a little bit brown, and then dark brown, and then you go to black, and then the other way around. And then there's just slow kind of gradations. So he says here, all national differences in the form and color of the human body run so insensibly by so many shades and transitions one into the other that it's impossible to separate them by any but very arbitrary limits. And so he's writing that in the 1740s. And then he writes here that no doubt can longer remain, but that we are with great probability right in referring all in singular as many varieties of man as are at present known to one and the same species. So there is that recognition that, yes, you can tell where people are from just by stating that, well, how does they look? But then you can't differentiate differences in species, but you can certainly differentiate differences in variety. And so in a way, it's that the variety is good, and you get that variety if it's the same species. Right? So otherwise it would just be like difference and not variety, the same sort of thing. So that was in the 1780s, a little bit before.
We can learn from that. We can learn from that. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and some studies, people that have studied genes initially came to the conclusion that we couldn't have a single man and a woman as the progenitor, as the start of the human race. They said it had to start with 10,000 people. But more close studies have indicated no, there could be just one man and one woman who started everything. So it's all front-loaded. It's all front-loaded. God knew what he was doing.
Plus, they lived so long. When you lived to be 900, you could have a lot of offspring.
Yeah, but it wasn't so much the quantity of the offspring, but the variety of the offspring. That Omar, you have your hand up? Okay. All right. Well, why don't we close now? And we got, as you can see, some of our sisters are working hard to get you some good refreshments. Angie, can I ask you to come forward and close us in a word of prayer? Thank you all so much for attending tonight. Really appreciate that.
If you would like more resources or more information regarding origins, please scan the QR code shown. May God bless your day.